but it has been, stop watching Fox or CNN or whatever you watch on crazy.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to TRD Talks Live. TRD Talks Live is a new program that we started post-COVID to address the issues and the problems that the real estate industry and the market are facing. And we talk to the top of the top, the guys at the very top in the back rooms, the big guys, to understand what's happening. And today is no different. But before we go into that, I just want to ask you guys that if you get value from these talks, if you get value from the news that The Real Deal puts together, if you get value from the emails and the breaking news that we sent to you, to please go to therealdeal.com and subscribe for a paywall. Support us so that we can continue to support you with this kind of programming and this kind of news. If you think it's easy to get Charles Cohen and Bruce Mosler in a room together, just try it and see how hard it is. We do that. So let us do that and continue to support us. We're very happy to have we have an amazing lineup for you today. Charles Cohen, one of the largest landlords in the country, about 14 million square foot across the country. But to just call him a landlord would be a mischaracterization of who he really is. He's a film producer. He's a publisher. He's in all sorts of different sectors, and we can talk to him about all the different economies that he's involved in. And we also have the super broker and the chairman of commercial brokerage, Cushman Wakefield, my friend Bruce Mosler, who's agreed to join us, and we're very happy to have them both here today. Some ground rules for today. We know New York City is a resilient place. We know we'll bounce back, so you don't need to preface any of your answers with the fact that we're going to bounce back. You know, we're all hoping for that, and I believe that we will do that. So no need to mention that. And we really want to talk about the strategies that you guys are thinking about. Future thinking. What are the thoughts that are going through your head? Today, Twitter announced that their employees can permanently work from home. What that says to me is that they can work from anywhere in the world. Do the employees need to be in a crowded, expensive, somewhat, in some places, a dirty city? Do they have to be here? No. They can be anywhere in the U.S. and work for Twitter. And that sort of thinking is going to, it's going to spread. And you guys know that. And I'd like to know what you guys are thinking about for the asset class. What will this mean, Charles, for your 14 million square feet if office employees are going to be able to work from anywhere in the world and not be at one of your Class A office buildings?
I think that you have to break it down to short, medium, and long-term effects. And right now, I think no one really has an idea of what the effects will be. However, with social distancing at the forefront of what we need to embrace, I would think that more space will be occupied over the medium term in order for people to accommodate the people that they actually need in their offices, in particular in New York.
Charles, who is going to pay for that more space? Right now, New York City is one of the most expensive places to rent office space in. And it's one of the biggest expenses a lot of companies have is office rent. And now we're going to go back to those people and tell them that you need more space for the same amount of people, so you have to pay more. Somebody is going to have to swallow the pain here. Will it be the landlord or will it be the tenants?
I think it'll be a balance between the two. I think that balance when you navigate troubled times like this. And, landlords and tenants should not be looking for the upper hand. They should be looking to satisfy their individual requirements and sensitivities.
Bruce, you're on the forefront of this. When we talked, you said you're basically just renegotiating all day long. So what are the conversations you're having with tenants? We saw yesterday that Overy is decided to stay in their space. I mean, you're dealing with the big tenants, right? You're dealing with 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 square foot tenants. What are those conversations like?
Well, we're dealing with all sorts of tenants, right, Amir? At the end of the day, as an organization, Cushman Wakefield's average deal size is probably, believe it or not, 8,000 or 10,000 feet. But yes, where we make our bread and butter, where we live and breathe, is in the larger deal transactions. And on that side, we're seeing a little bit of everything. Clearly, and Charles articulated this perfectly, you have to look at what's happening at the moment in three different phases. The current phase, which is pre-vaccine, the next 12 to 18 months is where the greatest uncertainty is. We are going to see tenants practice probably the most significant distancing that they can in their offices. The 6-foot office will become the norm. And at the end of the day, people will go back, sit at every other cubicle. People will go back and walk in one direction. Protocols will be in place for cleaning. People won't share keyboards. And at the end of the day, more space will be required to accommodate fewer people. That's a reality. And by the way, over the last decade, we had probably reached a point of densification as a industry that was pushing the limit. So coming back a little bit on this probably is where we need to be. Let me just make another comment and sort of offer a different view of where you opened with Twitter. Twitter is one organization that at the moment has, as you have just articulated, said, maybe you can work from where you want to. So let me give you some eye-opening facts. We have been doing a number of surveys of a number of companies and a number of employees, now upwards of 30,000. The generation that most wants to return that we have seen thus far is the millennial generation to the workforce.
Which I agree with you.
So,
and for our company too, I have people who are asking to go back. Nobody wants to be here.
So my point is this: Twitter is one organization. I can tell you as we speak that there are other TAMI sector, technology sector companies that are growing. One company we know just purchased a major asset in Midtown to accommodate their growth. They're not going to not occupy, they will.
Who's that? Bruce?
You know who it is. I don't want to mention it, but it's they bought the Lord and Taylor building, so that will tell you who it is. So the bottom line is, we need to look at this in bigger picture schemes than just one business. All I'm telling you is that sector, the technology sector, different companies will make different decisions, but in the end, it's their workforce that will drive how they act and how they behave.
Well, Charles, you're invested in this. Your real estate is, I wouldn't say it's your only legacy, but it's a major part of your legacy. That you cannot sit there and think that everything in 2 years, you're going to be at 95% occupancy. I know that's not what's going through your head. What are you thinking in terms of like how you're going to look at these assets and how you're going to work with these assets?
Well, we've always had a history of reinvesting in our properties. Every property, every year has projects that are ongoing, whether it's a new lobby or it's facade work or it's mechanical systems or it's elevator upgrades or cosmetic changes, bathrooms, corridors. There's always something to distinguish you from the competition. Location is key, and that's what I think people gravitate to in New York City is the location of New York. New York has been up and down so many times, but it always seems to come back because it's a place where people want to be. And walk to work, I think, has always been, the hallmark of location and the power of location in real estate.
Without a doubt, if they're in New York, that is without a doubt, that's something that's very valuable. But then we have to admit that even if a lot of people, millennials or whoever wants to come back to the city, there's going to be a percentage that's not going to want to come back, right? There's going to be a percentage of people who are going to choose to stay home.
So, Amir, if I could just say one thing on this, I'm old enough to recall 9/11 and in the middle of that, when people immediately in the aftermath said, downtown's not coming back, we're not going back to office towers, we're not going to tower floors, with the perfection of 2020 hindsight, downtown's one of the most valuable assets, if you will, or locations in the world. Mm-hmm. People are back in office towers. To try to determine today in the moment, what will happen is difficult. Mm-hmm. I do think this: if you're a company that requires scale, that wants to recruit the best talent to drive your business, particularly as a technology firm, you're in the end analysis going to have to come back to New York because it's where the talent resides.
Bruce, I agree with you. We have offices in Miami. We have offices in LA. The easiest place to get talent is in New York City. We talked about this.
And by a factor of what, Amir, in terms of recruiting? If you have
put out an ad in New York City, we get 50 people applying. 30 of them are qualified. We choose one. In Miami, we're lucky to get 3 people to apply, and hopefully one of them will show up to the interview. But that's not where we are. What I'm talking about, 9/11 was a very distinct thing. It was geographical. Yeah. It was in one point, in one place on Earth. This is a global effect that's affecting everything the way that we think about the entire asset class, which is the most valuable asset class in the world, which is real estate. And people are rethinking it. Companies are saying we don't need all that office space. We don't need to be here because people can work anywhere. And look, in the 90s, people realized that call centers didn't need to be in New York. They could be in India. And when you talk about technology, because of technology, they can afford to be in other places.
But technology's been a driver that's out there for the last 5 years on an accelerated basis. To the extent that technology is a factor in the future, 5% of the workforce right now, roughly, work from home. I think we all agree that that percentage is going to perhaps double or maybe more than that. That's going to offset some of the cost of real estate. It's early days. All I'm saying is I agree we're going to see a change both in the future workspace and how it's designed and what it accommodates. We're also going to see an increase in work at home folks. But to the extent that we want to make the call now and how it affects New York versus another gateway city versus a secondary city, I'll make the argument all day long that New York is more diverse, more robust. And at the end of the day, if you're a company that seeks scale, you don't build a brand, a business, collaborate on breakthroughs from remote work. That's perhaps my view, but I don't think I'm alone.
Right.
Remote working. I think it's a knee-jerk reaction. We don't have a choice right now. It's mandated that stay at home. So stay at home means if you want to stay connected to your business, you need to work remotely. But I think after staying at home for 7, 8, 9, or 10 weeks, it loses its freshness. Mm-hmm. And I think that people want to get back. They want to be productive. And Zoom and other tools that we have that are of a new style are helpful, but are no substitute for the human connection. Now, how do we get past what we're going through now? I think that the phrase "a community of immunity" is what we all need to embed.
That's right.
At that point, there'll be we'll overcome the fear of going out and doing things and going to a restaurant or a Broadway show or a movie theater. So we need to have this feeling that we are immune to what we can't see. This is an enemy that's very different than Al-Qaeda from 2001.
Right.
But what does this all do? What it does is it allows business to go through a right sizing. I think we all grew up a few years ago with restructuring your businesses. I'm sure Cushman Wakefield, through their strategic advisory services, gets very involved in that. But now I think the right phrase is right sizing our businesses, where there will be people that will not be brought back, and we will determine over time whether we need to grow new people in those places or bring those people back and see how our business advances. And, until this happened 2 months ago, things were doing really well. We're seeing expansion.
Charles, you mentioned that you guys update your buildings, new lobbies, new amenities and things like that. Thinking just in my head, you are a billionaire, and I feel like because you're a billionaire, you get the best and latest information. Your consultants, when you reach out to Cushman, when you reach out to McKinsey or whoever you consult with, what are the amenities that they bring to you now? And they say, these are the new things you need to add to your buildings to be competitive. We saw today that in China, in the Cushman building, that they're in elevators, they're only having 4 people at a time going in an elevator, which seems not sustainable. If you have a large building with, 20,000, 30,000 people in it, it seems not sustainable to have 4 people at a time going to elevators. What are some of the new sort of things that you're looking at and people are bringing to you to make you competitive?
What's competitive in the marketplace, and Bruce can speak to this, the new buildings have amenity centers, they'll have conference centers, they'll have dining facilities, they'll have wellness rooms, they'll have places to take a nap. It's everything that you would think you would need to do everything except go home and go to sleep. Mm-hmm. Older buildings don't have the luxury of being able to dedicate that kind of space. But by the same token, I don't know how valuable a gym is today in New York City for a building or otherwise. No one's going to go to a gym right now, even if they're open. So I think it's a matter of, if you don't have those amenities, are you near those amenities? And what can you do within the envelope you have to make yourself competitive? How do you look better? How do you filter the air better? How do you make your environment as healthy as you can? How do you deliver not only good service, but good value? And I think
it sounds like that's going to come at some sort of outlay cost to the landlord, right? In this case, yourself. So if you're talking about changing the air filtration and adding areas and stuff, that sounds like that's going to come at an outlay to come to landlords. Is that something that obviously you can afford to do it, but what percentage of landlords do you think they can afford to compete like that?
I think for it to be widespread, every landlord will have to find a way to make it competitive, just like everyone else does. It's not only what we would volunteer to do, but we have a lot of local laws. You know, there's always a bridge up in front of a building. There's a facade that needs to be redone. There's so much that is regulated that we have to do every time we turn around that continues to add cost in a city that's very expensive. Bruce spoke earlier about it being a value city. I think it's everything other than the rent that makes New York so expensive.
Do you think that the city and the state should sort of pull back on some of those regulations and the facade work and things that are not absolutely essential to sort of support you guys? Because so far I've heard some solutions for tenants, you know, and especially renters and people like that, but I still haven't heard of a mandate or any sort of a real solution for the people who actually hold these assets. And, you know, there is a domino effect, like we talked about yesterday, that, you know, if this person doesn't pay their rent, you're not able to pay your mortgage. And then this happens with the bank and so on and so forth. So what do you think the city and the state, can do to help you guys?
Not much. And I don't think that we add up to a lot of voters. And that's the problem. You know, the landlord is the landlord. Tenants don't really like signing those checks every month, I have to tell you.
I understand that. And, you know, the funny thing is that people, when they think of a landlord, they think of a guy in a top hat, you know, with a curled mustache. But the fact is, most of the landlords are not like you. You know, most of the landlords are, smaller folks who have smaller buildings who still have to manage their properties. Bruce, do you have any sort of solutions for the industry in terms of I know you're involved very politically. What solutions and, you know, what thoughts do you have on how the state and the city can help the landlords to sort of keep this stuff and keep them maintained? Because otherwise we're going to go back to the 70s where I'm sure you guys lived here, but I read horrible things about it. So otherwise we're going to have to go back to that era which nobody wants to go back to.
Amir, first of all, I'm too young to remember the 70s.
Uh-huh.
But having said that, let me just say a couple of things. First and foremost, I think that the cost of doing business in New York, we have to be careful. To Charles's point, if we keep piling on requirements for buildings to comply, where the costs are essentially passed through to tenants, we reach a break point where tenants say the cost of doing business at the end of the day can't be justified by the benefit of having the labor pool that we have here, which is, as you've heard me say before, I keep coming back to the labor pool being the driving force why businesses want to be and house themselves in New York. So I think it's a very fine line. And what I think government, city, and state have to be careful of, if you're going to implement new laws, new costs for landlords, whether it's to upgrade their buildings to meet new environmental standards, or it's upgrades to lobbies so that they are as current as they need to be to accommodate everybody, all of these things bear a cost. Let's do it in a fashion that allows that landlord to amortize it over a reasonable period of time so that the cost can be borne in a fashion that isn't overwhelming. And again, let's look at real estate and understand that it's more than 52% of the budget for the city. And let's remember that the city can't operate it without it. We are partners, and they have to treat real estate a little bit more like a partner than an adversary. So I think we have to come together thoughtfully. We have to keep pushing forward on environmental standards. We have to understand that business in New York wants to be here, but we can't break the back of business so that there's an alternative. And I think these are critical issues that we're facing every day. We're going to continue to face them. Let's face it.
That's not going to change, right? That's not going to change. That's going to be a constant battle. Bruce,
it's going to be a constant battle.
You represent some of the big landlords in the city, and you know Cushman Wakefield was very smart in putting out that immediately. I think it was like within 3 weeks that COVID was sort of out. You guys did that 6-foot workspace. Yes. And it spread around like wildfire that this is the new sort of trends that's happening. Are there other sort of revolutionary sort of ideas that you guys are talking about in behind closed doors that you can share with us?
Yeah, look, I think to your point, Amir, if I could just take a half a step back and then I'll get to your question, apologize. Look, we had the benefit of learning of putting almost 1 million people back into 800 million feet in China. While it's not all directly related, there were many lessons learned and best practices. That led to the playbook that you talked about that essentially said, here are best practices for how you go back to work and how you can do it without creating great expense.
Right.
I think what we're working on now is the next version of that playbook. When you go back to work, what will the workspace of the future look like? So we're collaborating with Heinz, with the Mayo Clinic. We're developing what we think will be, not necessarily, because again, it's early days, not necessarily the lasting new workspace of the future, but between now and a vaccine, what must be done that requires best practices, which is de-densifying. And then in the future, what will this new millennial generation and Gen Z generation want in the way of additional, if you will, amenities in their space to make it the environment that they feel safe and comfortable. And at the end of the day, everything we've been talking about really comes back to why are companies with having different policies about when they return and how they return, because they want to make sure their employees are safe. So we're focused on the 6-foot office and the next generation of that. What does that look like? Does that look like wider corridors? Does that look like increasing amenity space? So where you are collaborating, there's still more distance between you and your neighbor. Is the ideal conference room now not 25 or 50 people? Is it 10 people? Those are the things. I can't tell you we're done, but we're trying to take the new 6-foot office to the next level in incorporating the best minds that are out there and what that looks like. And we'll share that as soon as we have.
Well, I'm just curious, if you need 50 people in a conference, how are you going to make it a 25-person conference room? I mean, does that mean like Zooms at everybody's desks and like new tools that people have to use?
Well, I think technology is going to be a component part of it. But look, at the end of the day, the question is, do you need a 50-person conference room? You probably don't any longer. At the end of the day, technology will play a role in how many people need to be there and how many people won't. So we'll see.
Charles, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Let's not confuse an immediate reaction to a terrible
Precisely.
situation with what we expect in 6, 9, 12 months from now.
Post-vaccine.
6 feet apart for the rest of our lives, then that's a different world. And I don't think that is the long term, out of the long term. I think this is where we are now. This is creeping back and coming out into the sunshine and trying to figure out what is the new going to look like, how are we going to manage it, are we going to be able to go to a restaurant, are we going to be able to go and do some of the things that we enjoy doing. I think we'll get back to that, but again, once there has been a community of immunity and we're able to overcome our fears, listen, people will always get the flu, but not to the extent that they just did or harm. And it's a terrible thing. And just to hark back for a second about governmental regulation, I think what the government, local, state, federal, needs to give property owners is the time to be able to absorb the expense, to do we're on the track that they want us to be on. Just give us the time and don't come up with unrealistic expectations as to timing, because you expect everybody to run to five vendors and get the job done in a cost-effective way and in a timely way.
The problem is that nobody has a playbook for this, and there's no government official wants to be responsible for getting people back to a place and having additional deaths happening, and obviously nobody wants to risk that either. Charles, you also happen to love the cinema, right? So you have all these, these theaters that are like very, very much designed for cinephiles, like the Quad and the Corazon in London, and the Marquee and some of these places. And those are locations that are more in tune with the older generation of people who are like, true cinephiles who really appreciate that stuff. Are you worried that people who are older, who are more risk averse, who are not as risk averse, are going to go to those theaters as much as you were planning?
Well, we own Landmark Theaters here in the U.S. and Curzon in the UK, and we've been working 7 days on a reopening plan. And what's that going to look like, and how are we going to do it? And the entertainment industry is paralyzed right now because not only are theaters closed across the globe, at least in this part of the world, but the production side of Hollywood and filmmaking is stopped as well. Because you can't make a movie 6 feet apart. It doesn't work.
But Charles, if I could just say one thing to Amir's sort of question. Look, as you both know, I'm very involved and co-chair of the Intrepid Museum with Ken Fisher. And look, that museum at its peak had 1 million visitors. Do we anticipate that we're going to see 1 million visitors in 2020? Absolutely not. But to your earlier point, and I want to emphasize this is pre-vaccine. This is the new abnormal, as Reckler has coined it. And it's a difficult period where we're going to see social distancing. It's the only tool we have to protect ourselves. This will change post-vaccine, and it will be gradual, but the comeback will be there. People, just like as you said, Charles, with the 6-foot office, will it be the forever best practices? Probably not. But here's the reality. The comeback is going to take time. We need to be patient. It's going to take thoughtful approaches, and we don't want to go too far too fast, so we trip the wire and go backwards. At the end of the day, and I know you said not to say it, but we will get through the other side of this, and we will see people go back to dining. We will see people go back to enjoy the culture of New York. That is why people love this city and any gateway city, because that's unique to the qualities that you can get and the experiences that you can have. So, I'm confident.
You saw today that 56% of retail tenants didn't pay their rent, right? So those negotiations are happening. Yeah. And that's significant. I mean, yesterday when we talked about, so what's going to happen to all that retail, Charles, you suggested that they might just turn them into office space because that might be the only thing that makes sense in the near future.
Were tough enough before this. And how many vacant storefronts on any corner in any city in this country have you seen? It's, the internet has been a wonderful blessing and also a challenge for retail. I think people do enjoy the human connection of being out and touching things and sitting on things. But I think the retail challenge is the biggest challenge that New York City has right now.
Mm-hmm. And Bruce, for you guys, I mean, you guys must be doing a ton of renegotiations on that stuff. Is that do you guys have any solutions for your clients? Well,
it's not my day-to-day, my bailiwick, but I look at retail, Amir, and I say pre-COVID, it was hit with the perfect storm. Mm-hmm. You had the e-commerce effect, and then you had rising rents, and you were seeing retailers struggling pre-COVID in an enormous way, but I think we were just about beginning to hit bottom. At the end of the day, retail has to find itself. Rents have to be, I think, more in line with reality. There's going to be some adjustment there. And at the end of the day, retailers are going to have, the successful ones will develop their e-commerce business, and their experiential part of the retail will become critical. Now, again, I think that this is going to take time, and I think we have sort of had the perfect storm effect. But there are signs that certain retailers have their game plans for the future. We'll see who the new sort of stars on the street are post this, if you will, pandemic.
I like the idea that, the landlord has to believe as much in the tenant as the tenant does in himself, in that, they become partners, where the landlord takes a share of the revenues the way Maclo did with the Apple, space in
business for the landlord. They're in business for themselves. They have to pay rent. That's a given. Mm. They're not in business to enrich the landlord and not make a living themselves. So it's got to work. It's got to be a balance.
But Charles, it is a solution, right? If it's better than having your space sit empty and to have a tenant that can you can share in the growth revenues with them. No, wouldn't that be better than having the place sit empty? And it would give the opportunity for a lot more retailers to come into the market. Now all of a sudden, the grilled cheese guy who's got a great grilled cheese recipe can also have space in New York City, and they don't have to be some national tenant to be in New York City. And I think it'll open the space for new sort of smaller tenants to be able to afford to be in the cities.
Our philosophy on retail rents, the buildings have only a certain amount of retail at the ground floor. And it's important that the retail and the use enhance the value of the experience entering the building. It's got to be commensurate with the quality and the character of the building. I'd rather take half the rent that I would otherwise get than to have the wrong image at the building base. But at the end of the day, we've never been someone that looked for the last dollar, whether it be office space or retail space. We want the retailer to do business. We want the retailer's presence to enhance the value of the building and the experience that the tenants and the public that walk by feel about the building. So it's a very touchy type thing, if you know what I mean.
If I know for a fact that there's at least 2 city council members who are watching this right now, and one of the toughest things for the real estate community is zoning. Is outside, including zoning, what are some of the things that the state and the city can provide to make things easier? At the end of the day, the landlords in the city are providing roofs for businesses and for homes and for people. What can the city do to help you guys? I mean, if you could have it your way, what would that be?
We have this new town zoning that started under Mayor Bloomberg that was passed under Mayor de Blasio. We have a project that we're going to move into a ULURP on in the next few months. And Midtown zoning is about creating an environment of the latest and greatest real estate development for Midtown, which has been overlooked, where rents are higher in the meatpacking district than they are in Park Avenue, if you follow me. Mm-hmm. So I think that's going to be a very exciting component for shining a light on Midtown Manhattan and attracting users, large space users. Bruce, I'm sure, has many clients in that area right now that are, what's going on with J.P. Morgan, and there's some other big projects that are going to go ahead. This is a good sign for New York. So I think that zoning I think they're on track. I think there could be more culturally oriented incentives. Movie theaters are one thing, off-Broadway theaters, performance spaces. I even discussed this with Mayor de Blasio, is why is city planning not coming up with a bonus plan for developers to build spaces on the second and third floor, which are not as attractive for either office or residential use because they're low floors, to create more for community benefit, cultural amenities. I think that's a good place to start. And remove some of the gentrification that we experience walking down a lot of the canyons of New York.
Bruce, one of the things that makes New York City real estate so attractive to pension funds and sovereign wealth funds is that it's boring, right? It's a steady, it has the same returns, and they can rely on it. Some of that is going to change, obviously, right? After this, what do you think? 2 years from now, do you think that the Prince of Qatar is going to look at Midtown real estate the same way he did last year?
I do. And I'll give you my succinct version of why I think New York City real estate will continue to shine. Look, there are 3 things that we know about New York City. Historically, we have outperformed the national average in terms of employment growth. I don't think that's going to change. Secondly, when you look at New York City real estate and the robust nature of the, if you will, the tenancy, the occupants, we're not a one-trick pony. We're not driven by one industry, which many other gateway cities are. So we're extremely robust. It's a safe investment from that perspective. And because New York City typically outperforms, it's a liquid investment for, if you will, sovereign wealth, pension funds, and others. Mm-hmm. It performs at a higher level. It is more efficient. And at the end of the day, the market efficiency makes it an attractive place to invest. So 2 years out, I feel pretty good.
Look, Charles, yesterday you mentioned that you actually appreciate the second-tier cities, right? Do you think that this will lead the way for second-tier cities to have a big boom because there's greater opportunity and greater returns on investments? I mean, you invest all over the country, so.
Yes, and I have to tell you, it's easier to do business outside of New York, and the cost of doing business is less, the cost of construction is less, the pace is less, the excitement is less. We haven't invested in buying a building in New York in quite some time. It makes more sense for us to build a building somewhere else and create value. This is something that, our business breaks down into 3 areas: creating value, enhancing value, and maintaining value. That's what we, those are our watchwords.
But would you build in New York again, Charles, if the opportunity arose?
planning to, but I have, costs from 1983. So, yes.
Okay, you have a great basis, but you're still planning on it.
Because the basis is
I understand.
Barrier to entry is there's so many buildings that have been sold at such high prices, and not to traditional landlords. I mean, the complexion of today's landlord in New York City is institutional. It's a syndication. It's a real estate investment trust. It's a foreign investor. There's very few either family or private ownership. And as these buildings trade up at higher rents and big work letters, it's a little bit of musical chairs where there's only a point where someone can afford to say, I can't pay the rent anymore. It's too high. I don't care how much I put into the space. My business doesn't support it. So, is there a greater pool? Probably. But eventually prices collapse, and that's a free market system.
But we're forgetting, guys, with respect, that New York, from an international perspective, is still not, at the end of the day, terribly expensive. If you look at us compared to key Asian marketplaces, to European marketplaces, we're still inexpensive on that scale.
Mm-hmm. And Charles, you have one of the largest design centers in the country, the Dakota in Florida in Dania Beach. You've had your ups and downs with the place. Do you feel there's going to be a need to do a lot of redesigns and for people to design for social distancing and things like that? And do you think it's going to cause a boom to the businesses in the Dakota?
Dakota is primarily residential, and the good news is that Florida is a very attractive, safe tax haven right now. The climate is good, the quality of life is good, a dollar goes much further. A lot of hedge funds, because of the recent tax law changes about the deductibility of state income tax, Florida is booming. Mm-hmm. And we were able to refinance our design center recently and delevered it dramatically. So we can pretty much weather any storm going forward. And the design centers are, I think, a very easy way for people to do their design work all in one place without having to travel all over the place. We also have a very large office component.
Right.
We find that office tenants enjoy being around design tenants because they're attractive and there's not a lot of traffic and the quality of life is good.
Mm-hmm. And Bruce, who are the kind of tenants you're telling your team to go after right now?
I'll be honest with you.
The banks and the insurance companies have made it pretty clear that they're looking to downsize. So who are the sort of tenants that you think are looking for space right now?
Well, so look, a couple of comments. I think what we're spending the majority of our time on right now, Amir, is helping existing clients. I mean, whether that is on the landlord side or the tenant side, clients have a lot of questions. What's the best way to come back? How to come back? Should we, in the near term, take some space for dispersion purposes so our folks can stay off the transportation and stay out of the transportation hubs and drive to work? We're answering a lot of different questions for a lot of folks. Fortunately for us, I think that we have had the benefit of what we saw in China as a guideline, and also that playbook has helped us enormously. But look, we're spending time with healthcare tenants. We're spending time with our, as you said, banking and institutional clients and helping them really figure things out. This is a time to advise and help more so than pursue new business.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Well, guys, thank you. Yes, Charles.
Take a second. I mean, what I think Cushman Wakefield and other top-tier real estate service companies are doing, whether they're brokerage firms, management firms, mortgage brokerage firms, is they're providing value to their client base, and they're not charging for it because they value the relationship. By Bruce investing time with some of his important clients, they will call him up the next time they have a space need. So it's very logical. It's very smart. I think it's part of what in real estate we need to do to help each other stay in business and grow our businesses and grow the relationships we have that are so important to all of us.
Yeah, relationships are great. I mean, they sound great. They seem somewhat arbitrary in some instances. When the rents don't come in or when the checks don't come in, all of a sudden those relationships start to fade. I mean, for example, you have a lot of WeWork client tenants, Charles, right? Like at 750, we know you have a lot of space that goes to WeWork. Was that one of the spaces that WeWork paid rent this month?
Yes, they've been paying their rent. Yes, they have.
Great. Yeah, I'm guessing all over New York they are. Well, guys, thank you so much for your time today. Any final thoughts, Charles, from you?
I think, as Bruce mentioned so astutely before, we'll all get through this if we can just take a deep breath and take the time we need to navigate uncharted territory, be tolerant, be patient. I think you can't discount the human factor. We're all people. Everybody shouldn't be in this to take advantage of the situation. We should try to strike a fair balance, provide value and stability.
And I'll just add, Amir, the fact that TRD and you personally allow us a voice in this moment, and in fact are a voice, is very important, because right now people want information. Charles touched on this very, very accurately. Safety and welfare is at the highest priority for every business that I know of in every firm. They're concerned about their folks, which is why they're going to be flexible in terms of how and when they come back. And the fact that we have vehicles like TRD that can put this out there, share information, so that people can kind of, I think, bring the curtain down on the unknown. This is a very difficult moment. As Charles said, we got to be there for each other. The psychological impact on this, we've never been through anything like this before, so it's difficult. And I thank you for allowing us a couple of moments to share.
Thank you, guys. And for all of those people out there, we know we have over 4 million unique visitors every month. If only a small percentage of those guys could pay for the subscription, if you find value in this sort of talk.
I pay for mine.
Well, thank you so much, Bruce. We really appreciate it. I'm talking to the other 3,999,000 of them. But so that would be really appreciated. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Charles, for your time. Thank you, Bruce. Thanks, everyone.